Welcome, listeners, to yet another episode of 100% Sale of Journalism Ethics Here, a weekly news review podcast with me, Kaushal Bhatia.
And Sailesh.
For all the first time listeners to this podcast, here's how it'll go. Sailesh and myself have selected a few stories that broke out or developed in the last week from certain beats and give our 2 cents on the same. Each one of us will talk about a story that we have researched. In the first minute, we have to narrate the story in as much detail as possible, and the following few minutes will be open for group discussion. And yes, it will be as boring as it sounds. I know that for sure because this is the feedback that we've received even from our paid listeners. Before we begin, there's an update from a story that Sailesh had picked in the Beat interview of the week in the previous episode. The interview was of Ajay Pal Lamba, who is the current additional commissioner of police in Jaipur. He was promoting his book, which he has co-authored with Sanjeev Mathur, about the events that led up to the arrest of the now infamous Godman, Asaram Bapu. A Delhi court has stayed the release of the book till the next hearing as the case is still sub judice and would interfere with the trial of Sanchita Gupta, a co-accused in the case. You can check out that from the previous episode and skip to the beat of your choice by clicking on the timestamps provided in the description. That being said, let's move on to our first beat. National news. This story comes from the Indian Express. The byline is credited to no one, it is the Express News Service. And here is the headline: Maharashtra Bill for Suspension of Right to Property of Owners gets government nod. Marking time-bound redevelopment of dilapidated cessed buildings in the island city mandatory, the state legislature on Tuesday approved various modifications to a state legislation, that is the Mahada Act, that enables the Maharashtra Housing and Area Development Authority to acquire dilapidated cessed properties where the landholders or developers are found stalling redevelopments. Basically, what this article is saying is that there is the act which was introduced in 1976, which allows the government to acquire the government body in Maharashtra, which is the Mahada, in this case, to acquire any buildings which are in ruinous conditions and are at the almost in the verge of falling down or breaking and risking the life of the people living inside these buildings. A 9 member Supreme Court is hearing a matter where the Property Owners Association has challenged the provision to suspend an owner's right to property. The matter has been running for decades. According to the new provision, owners of such buildings will get 6 months to initiate redevelopment once they are tagged as dangerous to live in. The collective of tenants or the housing society will get another 6 months for such redevelopment, failing which the Mahada will step in to acquire the building and redevelop it with a builder of its choice. The move will have a direct impact on 14,207 such properties in the island city, most of which are over 70 years old. Now, I think this is a great thing because it is going to obviously make sure that not a lot of people fall victim to, improper architecture or buildings
Correct.
that have gone through the test of time on the verge of falling. But at
Correct.
the same time, I think this policy will is also there's a lot of scope for people to misuse it, as
Correct.
we know that the government machinery or the bureaucrats who run these places, they are often known to fall into greedy minds and basically take advantage of these situations. So what is your initial thoughts about this particular thing?
I think it's a good decision because uh, I have been hearing news of the missing many houses and buildings in Mumbai collapsing, and either due to a lack of maintenance or because they have aged a lot. So I think it's a good decision by the authorities. And uh, to cite you an example, I remember there was this guy called Bruce Deepenna. So
Hmm.
now, what happened in his case was he was at a building of which the ground floor was a commercial area where there
Hmm.
was shop, and he was just collecting his laptop that he had given for repairs. And in the meanwhile that he was waiting to collect it and paying for the repairs, a building next to that building collapsed. The building had been vacant for around 20 years, and it collapsed on that building. And huge concrete slabs from that building ended up uh, entering the shops on the ground floor. And what happened in that process was Depenna was just at the counter. The slab directly fell on him. He was initially wounded seriously, and then as the rescue crew came and removed him from the debris, and they sent him to the hospital, he died on the way. And
Hmm.
when I heard this, I was very shocked that things like this happen on a regular basis in Mumbai, because I heard a few days
Yeah.
back there was a renovation work going on, two, three workers died. Same thing keeps happening over and over again in Mumbai. So
No,
if
that's true. Even in the South Mumbai, I think one locality, I don't remember which exactly, but there have been many news of buildings collapsing and people dying because of that. So I think this is a great move. But at the
correct,
same time, I want to play the devil's advocate and see the
yeah,
flip side of this. Now, say
yeah,
the owners who are owning these lands and they are owning these old villas or bungalows where they have tenants also who are paying money as per the pagdi system,
okay,
which earlier existed. And this has also been a case where there's been a tussle between tenants and owners because, it is just the land and property is a very, it's a thing that has been that the judiciary is tackling, and there are tons and tons of cases related to people either encroaching or people squatting and are unwilling to leave the premises, and according to certain laws they are safe and they would not be harmed if they are inside. But also there should be something that is fair and equal for both. Like for example, the Pagadi Act, many of the tenants who are living in very prime locations in Mumbai are still just paying 300 rupees per month and they are refusing to leave. Now,
yeah,
the one particular technicality in this is if the people, the owners decide to redevelop the buildings that are in ruinous conditions, then they would also have to compensate the tenants. But if
okay,
these buildings fall on their own accord, then the tenants who are paying the Pagadi system do not get anything. So
okay.
the
Huh,
yeah, so they are not entitled to anything. So in that, the incentive for the owner will be to not do anything because these people are not ready to, take inflation into consideration and even pay like a proper amount of rent. Like 300 rupees per month is crazy.
correct. No, no, I agree. I think when you look at it in that way, it's not ideal, but then you understand why that is happening more often than not.
Yes, but I guess this would be one of those cases where people who are in this situation will be collateral damage because the majority of the people would benefit from this, I feel.
Correct.
And many of these laws and all that have always had some collateral, and we'll see how this one goes. What do you say, Sailesh?
I agree with you. When you look at it that way, I hope like um, I would hope for a situation where both sides gain something.
Yeah, that's the ideal. Okay, so the next beat that we move on to is national politics, which is going to be taken up by you.
Yeah. So the story we picked for this particular beat this week is don't use party name to campaign in US polls. BJP to members. Uh, so the story has been widely reported, but it's not. I think when you add context to it, you understand the gravity of it.
Hmm.
So Vijay Chauthewale, in charge of BJP's Foreign Affairs Department, has written to overseas friends of BJP OFBJP US chapter and cautioned them against using the party's name or forum officially to campaign for either side in the US presidential election.
Hmm.
So, what has happened in this case is, as you know, there are two sides to US presidential election. One is Democratic and the Republican, and the BJP is officially not endorsing anyone. That's what they are trying to say, and they're saying if you are engaged in any way promoting either of the candidates, please do it on your own personal capacity rather than also including the party in it.
Hmm.
So I think there's another article that could be linked to it, and that would give a good context to this story. Is it's written on the Diplomat. The title is India's identity politics has reached its diaspora in the US, and the article goes on to explain and analyze the role of Indian diaspora and the impact it has had on the US politics. At the same time, the impact from what is happening, the particular situations taking place in India,
Hmm.
and their impact on the diaspora and subsequent impact on the US electorate as well. So, in a
Yeah.
world which is globalized, I think it's a very unique phenomenon that is emerging nowadays, where Trump is holding an election rally of sorts in India, Namaste Trump, and then
Yes.
Modi is holding an election rally in the US, Howdy
Howdy.
Modi,
Yeah.
and how they are interlinked. And now also, if you see the amount of times Indians are mentioned in the US elections, the it feels like they've come to play a prominent role in the elections in some way or the other, because both sides are trying to what you call that, uh, quote the
Yeah.
Indian community.
Yeah, and that is especially like visible when you see the vice presidential candidate becoming Kamala Harris.
Correct.
So I think it's, whatever being said, like whatever the thing is, the relationship between US and India has improved, like, I don't know, innumerably, like over the years. And I think the foreign policy of both of them they look at each other in a very positive role, I feel
but
now.
but the diplomat article argues is what has happened over the years is, at the same time, while the relations are improving, the diaspora is becoming more prominent, playing more role, the diaspora is also becoming polarized now. If you see, what
Hmm.
that particular article talks about is certain protests that were led by a certain group of people against the Delhi riots in India, against the against anti-CA protests that they led against, uh, the bill in India by
Hmm.
the Indian diaspora over there. Whereas at the same time, there were people who are supporting it. So they are also saying that it's not a homogeneous thing. It's not
Right,
a
right.
single. It's a depolarized diaspora at the same time. So both sides are appealing to the people who are more to near to their thought process. Like Trump is.
But I'll tell you one thing.
Uh,
Sorry, if I may.
yeah.
I feel that the diaspora in abroad, overseas, or the NRIs that live anywhere are mostly, I think, because now they see the current government and the way India has shown its presence in different countries and the
Hmm.
respect that they gain. I feel somewhere the majority of these people are going to pay heed to whatever they are saying.
Who is saying?
The current government in power. That is my personal belief. I feel that even though and that is the proof of what kind of democracy India is. There is like tons of right now, even if you look at the media right now with the amount of a lot of unnecessary news that they are reporting, that are really polarizing. They're like extremes that have been existing, which is a great thing. Although still the media is kind of becoming more closer to Modi. But continue, like, please, can you go on? Give me one. Yeah.
No, I just had one point to say that it may seem like a lot of the diaspora stands with the ruling party, or maybe it likes a particular leader in India, but that's not the truth, because just the way in India, the ruling party doesn't get all they don't have on their own, they have not taken 80% of the votes in the election. So there is a large
Correct.
chunk of this country's voters who have not accepted the ruling party. Same thing goes with the people abroad. That there is a large chunk. Maybe they are not very prominently shown. Maybe the media is not covering the things correctly. Maybe it's not. They are not able to do it. But the point is that uh, there is a diaspora. It is polarized. Now we'll have to see how, if we can analyze and find out how the diaspora voted, and let's see how it goes.
So basically, we don't know whether if any kind of inclination that the current government gives on which party they should support, we don't know whether it's going to create an impact or whether it's going to help either of the Democrats
I
or Republicans.
I have a feeling that by holding the Namaste Trump, the way it was held, it
Hmm.
was nothing less than an election rally,
Oh yeah.
and the way it was supposed, this thing orchestrated in a way of sort, and at the same time, what was happening on the sidelines, the riots had started on the day when Trump was in Delhi. It wasn't a day after that or before that. So
Hmm.
those things, it's more or less gives you an idea the way it was done. uh, like, maybe the ruling party is signaling something. I'm speculating purely. So
No, but I think it's a very evident thing now when they do these things, or maybe it just could, like, yeah, I guess you're right.
so,
In on that note, I feel should we move on to the next beat?
yeah, of course.
Yeah. So the next beat is business, and I will be taking that up. Yet another article from the Indian Express. Although for this beat, I have two articles which I'm going to address. The first one is from the Indian Express. It is written by Ashish Aryan, and here's the headline: Bankruptcy resolution falters as ED, CBI, SEBI create hurdles. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, rolled out in 2016 by the central government to fight the rising pile of bad debt, has started to falter in its aim because of various challenges mounted by its own agencies and regulators. At least a dozen big ticket cases with total debt in excess of 99,700 crore have been stuck up for 3 years now due to legal challenges. The Enforcement Directorate has been the most proactive, attaching properties of companies despite orders from adjudicating authorities against doing so. Consider the case of Bhushan Power and Steel. The debt-laden company admitted to insolvency in 2017 owes more than rupees 47,000 crores to banks and other financial institutions, and another 780 crores to its operational creditors. After a prolonged bidding battle, JSW Steel won the rights to take over Bhushan Power with a bid of 19,700 crores. However, before the Sajjan Jindal led company could move to take over Bhushan Power, the ED swooped in and attached assets worth 4,000 crores, citing alleged fraud in a bank loan taken by the company's former owners and other cases under the Prevention of Money Laundering Act. So basically, what this article talks about is there are various companies which had started developing a pile of bad debt, and they were not being able to pay it back. Many of them might have done some frauds, I feel. And now, because of the IBC that was introduced in 2016-17, a lot of these companies could just start with, either selling off their assets to pay back the loans, or put the company itself on auction, and one of the bigger companies could either bid for it just for its machinery and whatnot. But because the
Hmm.
ED, SEBI, and CBI coming in and attaching certain properties of the which include some kind of fixed or capital assets of the company to kind of regain these loans, it is spooking the people who want to buy these companies, and it's creating a big problem for the government
Okay.
to get rid of this and regain the loans.
Okay. Okay.
So that is the first article that I want to address. The second one is SBI sends notice to Bhushan Power promoter seeks to invoke personal guarantee. Now, this particular article is from CNBC TV 18, and
Okay.
it is credited to, I think it's a video. It's one of their Ritu Singh. It's credited to Ritu Singh. The notice dated 31st August had been sent to Sanjay Singhal, promoter of Bhushan Power and Steel under the Indian Contract Act 1872, said a banking executive in the know. State Bank is looking to invoke the promoter's personal guarantee for 12,276 crore of loan defaults by BSPL. JSW Steel
Okay.
has been identified as the highest bidder, which I already told you from the previous article,
Huh.
who basically made the offer of 19,700 crore. However, the
Yeah.
proposed takeover is pending a Supreme Court ruling on several matters relating to the case, including ring fencing the acquirer from the offences committed by the company's promoter Single. Ring fencing basically means that keeping aside the finances and the acquirer, the person who's acquiring the company, his finances and whatever the fixed capital assets are of that particular company which they are buying, from whatever they need to do to regain the loans from Singhal, who was the promoter of Bhushan's Power and Steel. So my point is,
Okay.
the fact that these companies come in, and there are two, three cases I'll just read out. Bhushan Power and Steel is one of them, which is spooking the bidder right now, which is JSW. Educom Solutions The CBI booked former promoters for fraud, attached property, spooked a big Singapore, which was a company which wanted to acquire it, and various such things, which is
Okay.
detrimental for us to regain these bad loans, these NDAs, as that is the right word, right? Is it NDA if I'm not wrong?
NPAs,
NPAs, my bad. Uh,
non-performing.
yes, non-performing assets which are unmoved. So what do you and the I think the move that they've taken now, where SBI is sending Bhushan Power, the promoter of it, to invoke his personal guarantees to get the loan back. I think
Hmm.
that's what should have been the move from the start.
Okay.
And I will take your opinion on this first before I say anything else. What do you feel?
I think for a long time we've seen that many companies that uh, basically end up having debt problems always find it difficult to either dissolve their companies or sell them, or uh, somehow manage it. Because what we see, for example, Jet Airways was a good example. It was a big company. It was having a good share of the Indian aviation market, but it had accumulated a lot of wealth, and then they were not able to sort it out uh, at the time that it was required. In the end, the company went bust, the planes were grounded, the whole airlines went bust. That means a loss in GDP for the country. Maybe a small chunk, but it is a chunk. And then at the same time, lost employment. So similar things. I mean, I'm not an expert, but what my perception is from what you told me and what I've seen is that many a times when these things happen, the government moves in, and sometimes it's detrimental to these companies. You are not able to. Maybe these assets these are assets. These are running
Yes.
companies. So unless they are not, they were uh, misrepresenting themselves.
Hmm.
These companies could be, salvaged of sorts. Something could be salvaged, like you said.
Correct.
JSW uh, purchase the company and then take over the machinery and certain assets that would be more valuable to them. So maybe the law
Hmm.
and enforcement needs to pay attention to that, not to hurt the company so much that it becomes
Correct.
a redundant effort to save them. That's basically a very very amateur, very very basic understanding of this whole thing.
Hmm.
I'm
And
not
yeah,
an
like you
expert.
said, people who are trying to save these companies and put life back into it, start generating
Correct.
revenue for the country again, give the employees who are already working for these companies, the
Correct.
security of job and all. If you're going to do this, then it's like
Hmm.
already the economy is not in a great shape. So for like getting say
Correct.
12,000 crores or something of that amount, you're going to stop another company which has bought it, which is paying this and is going to generate revenue for the country itself. Like
Correct.
where I don't know why there is no coordination between these agencies. Like there should be this aim that the government sets, the finance ministry sets, right? And these companies should understand the goal that we don't want to spook bidders, we don't want to spook the businessmen who have the capacity to buy these things. I think that's why probably even Air India is not being bought, because they know that these people are going to try to find something or the other, and that will put a break into their operations, which I don't think anyone can afford.
I I don't know much about Air India in the technical sense. What's exactly the situation? Why people are not buying? But I think a lot of it has to do with the debt that Air India carries, because it's just too much for airlines to
So
have. And
that can
anyway,
be like a sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt so quickly, but I'm
no,
saying
no,
they can do
no.
the ring fencing thing, right? Where they can be like the new acquirers, the person who acquires the new company, they shouldn't be like they shouldn't encounter these debts to this level, maybe a little bit, but not so much also. Because then they're not going to buy it. They've not even run the company. They've not even got these assets, and you're telling them to pay like 90,000, 70,000. I don't know how much, but they are in big debt. I know. So I don't know why I
But
always bring Air India into everything.
no, but I think a lot of, I mean, let's not get too much into it, but basically a lot of these acquisitions happen because of the assets. For example, Air India, because they have those airline routes that are very valuable, very lucrative, which they
Hmm.
control, and any private agency would love to have them. So those kind of things are involved. Like it's a very complex thing.
Right. So I think in this case, I feel it's the right decision or the right direction that the banks are going in, where they are
Yeah.
invoking the personal guarantees of these promoters who have faulted in some way, which created this
Mm,
big loss. Also, whatever fraud or alleged fraud, I'm not saying fraud and all that in a very this
mm,
way, but I want the listeners to understand that this is in that spirit is why they have been gone after by these agencies. So it should be them themselves and their
correct,
personal guarantees that should be taken by these agencies. Further, I just want to mention that the article also mentions that SBI had also recently moved to invoke Anil Ambani's personal guarantee for Reliance Communications default. That matter is also pending in the top court.
mm,
So
correct,
I feel both of these it makes total sense for them to get whatever they can from these personal guarantees and regain whatever of the loan that they can, because I mean it's not a small amount. For them it
correct.
could be, for us it's not. Okay, I guess on that note, shall we move on to the next beat?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so the next beat is international and that is taken by you. Anytime you're ready.
So the story that we chose for this particular beat this week is U.S. Air Force tests robot dogs during uh, combat employment exercise. So it's not where I know it's a very technical story, and but I thought it was an interesting thing that happened over the weekend. And what they did, what they basically did is very clear from the title. So they had this particular robots which had a body that is like that is shaped like a box, and it had those spring legs. And what they did was the dogs would go into the in the trial that was shown. The dogs would enter the combat, the simulated combat zone,
Huh.
and they would enter first and give the visuals and relay it back to the team that was waiting. And the US soldiers would then see the surroundings, get an idea of what's happening, a reconnaissance of sorts. And the dogs are capable of operating in all the terrains. If they fall down, they're able to get up and basically move around and give a good idea of what the environment is like. And the people then, judging on how the situation is, can act. So it's like what do you call that, unmanned aerial vehicle, except that
Yeah.
the way the role that we plays, the dog is trying to simulate fear in these experiments. So if it's successful, it would be obviously deployed, and to an extent, it sounds like a good idea, like a good strategy moving forward, to have more robots in the combat. Like, as we know, the technology is evolving and it's becoming more and more prominent in warfare. So that's why I chose the story.
Yeah, when I hear something
What do
like
you?
this now, I'll tell you what I think of. I'm like, I mean, this is so much out of the box. I mean,
Terminator.
yeah, that Robocop. No, but genuinely, I feel that this is a very creative. It's so like they're thinking. I wonder what is still under the wraps, which they've not even kind of released to the press, because they might be working on some other crazy stuff. I feel most of us don't even are not even aware of the kind of technology that they've now got, to have these wars and such, and now using animals and obviously dogs. Like they would be really easy to, go up a incline or, go through rough terrain like you just explained right now. I think this is great. I don't know what else to say. I'm just amused.
Hmm. The good, I think the thing about US this thing armed forces is they always do something, and they have the budget for it. They have around over 700 billion budget for the year to
Wow.
operate. So what they do is always take are always a step ahead. Like, you can match them in certain capacities, but when it comes to innovation, they are still ahead. So
Mhm.
in that sense, this is another step ahead, and maybe it may seem like a small thing, or maybe it may not have been noticed by a lot of people at this particular point of time. But imagine if these particular robot dogs are weaponized. They are able to carry small arms and operate them, and eventually carry uh, smaller arms, but which have lethal power. That
Yeah,
changes the scenario. Huh.
that reminds
So
me, I had.
instead of
Sorry, continue. Sorry, continue, please.
so just to give you a scenario, there's a lot of criticism that goes when these Western countries carry out airstrikes in the Middle East, whether it's in Iraq, it's Syria, or any other country that's there, uh, presently going under conflict. So the airstrikes have collateral damage. Now imagine a robot or two like this drop down, go into the particular house, detonate, or maybe they fire a missile from them, and
Mhm.
that detonates. It there is the chances of minimizing the casualties more, because the dogs would give a real time picture of exactly who is there in the house. So this is just a scenario I'm trying to think of, but obviously you should
Yeah,
you
so
should go ahead.
like this particular thing that you told me about is very interesting, and obviously they can do that because remote detonators and all now have become much more advanced than they were, say, 10 years back also now, because in technology is growing at a breakneck speed. But this reminds me of one thing I had heard on Quite Interesting, which is a UK-based panel show, and they had
Hmm.
given this kind of trivia where the Russians in the war, I think it was the Russians or was it the Nazis itself in the World War, they
Huh.
tried to use dogs to attack the American, like tie bombs or something to the dog. But the problem was the dogs used to come back to the like the
Ah, yeah,
people.
yeah.
So that so they faced casualties, and then they decided not to do that. Like they would be like, go dog, go to that area, and then you would get blasted, but then you would just come back to the owners, which was whichever army had deployed them, and they faced
Hmm.
casualties. So that's pros and cons of everything. If the dog turns when you're shooting the missile at the wrong time,
No, it's a
it
robot.
friendly
But
fire.
there's no returning.
Oh, so there's no live dog at all. It's like a robot dog.
No, that's the reason I chose the story. The dog is a
Oh
robot.
my
It's
God.
completely
I thought that you said like, okay, now it makes much more sense. Okay. I realize. So it's a box. In that there is this robotic dog which they take and carry around. The dog gets out of this particular box and it does its thing, like the reconnaissance and all.
no. It's I mean, if you see the picture, you will understand it. The body of the particular robot is a box, a rectangular box, and it
Hmm.
has four limbs attached to it, and
Okay.
basically it resembles a dog. So the robot then moves around, goes and checks the scenario. So it's a complete. There's no box. The body is a rectangle. It's like a box. That's what I'm
Hmm.
saying.
Okay.
I'm
That's
so
quite
sorry. I
interesting.
very clear.
No, but I mean, there's a network issue as well. But that is quite interesting, and the innovators of warfare. The US has brought this new thing, the milk killing dog. And yeah, so what says Elish? Shall we move on to the next story on this note?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
of course.
On that note, we'll move on to the beat of sports, which I'll be taking.
Hmm.
And wow, I think I've been just going to Indian Express today because this one as well is from the Indian Express. And I promise you, listeners, I have been going through other websites as well. I just feel Indian Express is doing a great job. So I feel you all should also check out their website. But, anyways, so this particular beat, I want to talk about this podcast that Indian Express has. It's a sports podcast, which I came across today. And the title of this podcast is Game Time, Everything That Is Wrong with the National Sports Awards. This particular podcast is hosted by Mihir Vasavada, and in this
Okay.
particular episode, he's joined by Nihal Koshi to talk
Hmm.
about why such a ridiculous long list of awardees is a problem and how it devalues the entire point of awards and the shortcomings of the selection committee. And
Hmm.
when I was listening to this particular podcast, they were talking about the incident of Sachin Nag, who was a swimmer, and in 1951, in some particular international event, he had won the gold for India. But and despite still going for other few more such tournaments representing India
Tournament.
in international tournaments. He was not given the award or any government award because, and he
Mm.
had received the gold at that time. And they
Yeah.
also talk about various other particular sports people or athletes who have not received their due, despite them, doing a great job in making the country proud. So I feel that this would be a great thing for the listeners to go ahead and have an understanding of how it is. Also, there's one particular, I think they will go ahead and listen to it. My question to you, Sailesh,
Mm.
is you
Mm.
always see a very pathetic condition. I mean, I think now it's improving in many places, but generally a very pathetic condition of the sports federation that exist of the various states in India. And why do you think that is?
Um, I think this whole maybe one of the reasons is there's no money in it. That is one of the
Hmm.
reasons. Secondly, there's a lot of politics, and I don't mean like organizational politics. There's a lot of influence from politics on the sports.
Hmm.
If you see the personalities that are there in the sports bodies, they have some political affiliations, or they are related to someone who has an affiliation. Sorry,
Hmm.
who's in politics. So these two are one thing, and secondly, I don't know, maybe because we are not we are a poor country, so maybe we are not able to pay attention to these things. And definitely,
Yeah.
uh, when I hear things about athletes not having equipment, and then eventually then having to prove themselves first and then getting the equipment, so that's just the it's like a
Yeah.
ulta process. It goes backwards. Rather than having the equipment and then getting recognized, they have
Yeah.
to first
And
get
and
recognized
you
and
and me both, we don't have a lot of experience of sports federations, or we've never personally kind of seen them function or the insides of it, but it's just from what we've read and what we've come to know from people
yeah.
talking about it. And one other thing that I want to highlight is there's a lot of politics, like you said, obviously, of the influence of politicians of the states, but also
Hmm.
of the politics of people who are at certain statures and who have been elected in these organizations which accept or approve certain of these teams representing India and all that. And there have been such petty instances that are starting to come out now over the years in the volleyball federations or the whatever that is, where the people who are genuinely skilled are told to bend of whatever ego or all this of these committee members that they have, and failing which they kind of overlook them and do not give them the chance that they deserve. So I
Correct.
feel that kind of vindictive behavior is not going to take us anywhere, and there needs to be like an independent body to do this. I think politics getting into everything is killing meritocracy or the skills or the like good people to come up and take their dues.
I agree. Same thing goes with the people who had these federations on state level or local level. I mean, they do it for a very long time, and they have their own, they run it like a fiefdom. But, anyways, we are getting too much into it. But the
Yeah.
basic thing is the functioning is reflective of how the players are treated. And if they don't get the dues, that's because the bodies who are supposed to take up their speak up for them or work for them are maybe not paying attention to that. That's the
Hmm.
problem.
Yeah. So I mean, what do you think would be a
Hmm.
solution for this? Can you think of anything? I'm actually drawing blanks. I'm genuinely asking if you have any kind of, do you think you have any idea of how it could be better?
To be honest, I don't have a lot of expertise, but one thing I can say is what we can understand by the way sports federation are run abroad in the developed countries. I know it cannot be replicated here because we don't have that much money and all.
Hmm.
But the basic aspect has to be that those people, for example, when the movie released MS Dhoni, and you've seen the
Hmm.
selection process that was there, and there is a particular scene where MS Dhoni is not selected and a particular player is selected. So uh, that struggle,
Hmm.
who eventually goes and captains the team, the struggle he has. The point is that on the grassroots level, th- that thing is not the whole idea of what the sport has to be, and it has to cultivate the talent from the grassroots, is not being implemented. And the people who show a knack for it either have to shift careers eventually from their sports. Because there was a particular girl in my class when I was in college, and I asked her. She was a track runner, and I
Hmm.
asked she used to run 100 meters, and I think at one point she was the fastest girl in my state, Goa. So I
Hmm.
asked her, why did you change? So she's like, see, eventually there is no money in it. If I keep doing it, I'm not gonna earn anything. I need to pick up a skill. So she came and studied journalism. So my point was, if she was the fastest girl in India, sorry, Goa, and maybe if she was given a chance to compete on a national level, given certain stipends, maybe she could. It may not be a lot, but if that recognition and that stipend comes, and eventually it leads up to something. Because what a lot of people start doing nationals for is to get eventually quotas in particular jobs and all those
Yes,
things. Now, if that is a
that's what it
motivation, then
is.
sport suffers, because there is a ulterior motive to it.
That's true.
So,
And if
so I
nothing else, if I think not the stipend, I at least think that the infrastructure should be there in most places, at least a track, a good, some kind of gym. I mean, it's not that expensive to build those things. And anyways, you're kind of going to build a community center for people, right? So if you make it like a great level, if you make sure that there is state of the art kind of infrastructure that you build on the government's expense, I think that is going to just itself make a lot of people get into sports because, well, obviously, if you have it, you're going to use it, right?
correct. And secondly, as I said, this whole thing where the merit is recognized, that has to be there. Because there are only once in a way there comes a Mahendra Singh Dhoni or people like him. And
Yes,
I'm talking a lot about cricket because that's predominantly what we see. So
correct,
I
correct.
apologize on that part, but basically the idea is that if there is merit and there is no recognition, there is the person obviously has no option but to pursue something else. But if someone recognizes, harnesses it, and promotes it, maybe that
Hmm.
person can be like uh, a sports icon that India can look up
Correct,
to. And secondly, it
correct.
has to be with people also, that people start following other sports rather than focusing on only a few particular sports, like select sports. They should also diversify. Because
Yeah.
I don't know if India has a person who's like, for example, you have Usain Bolt in Jamaica. Now we have various a diverse group of sports that happens. We don't know who's a good track runner in India.
Hmm.
Maybe we don't know who's a good shot put throw champion. Maybe people who follow that particular news is aware of it, but other than
No,
that,
that's
that
true. I
prominence.
think I think they don't get that kind of exposure that they deserve because they do some great things. Like if you're representing a country internationally in these events, I think you don't have to kind of make it exciting for ADD people, such content.
Mm,
But yeah, and I don't think we need to apologize to Ramesh. He's very nice, the one listener that we have of that podcast. He understands that we are not very good at sports. And anyways, on that note, we will move to the next beat, which is entertainment, and that is going to be taken up by you anytime you're ready.
So the story that I chose for this particular beat is, the title goes, after Indian matchmaking, youngsters want to go for an arranged marriage. Seema Taparia.
Hmm.
So
Oh,
people who don't know who she is or what this Indian matchmaking whole thing is basically a show that came out on Netflix a while ago, and it shows Indian arranged marriages. And from what I saw, and unfortunately to my limited knowledge, I just saw a part of the first episode, and it basically was of Indian origin people in US, where they are going for an arranged marriages. People who have been successful in their careers, they're established lawyers and all those kind of people, and their expectations in going the traditional way. So what she's saying in this particular uh, conversation the with Dhruv Rathi, who runs his own explainer channel on YouTube.
yeah.
During the interview, she said I'll just quote her.
Hello.
Yeah, just like
Wait, your voice is
cut out.
cracking. Your voice is cracking.
Should I start over again?
Start over again.
All over again.
No, no, you can continue from this. I think we got the gist of it, the Indian matchmaking. And I'm sorry I was laughing in the middle of you explaining it because I know what you're talking about. But continue, please. So
Hmm.
Dhruv Rathi is
So,
interviewing Seema Taparia and she's saying what?
so she said that after the show aired on Netflix, and a lot of people saw, she got thousands of emails and queries, and they want to go through this process, and uh, they want to get married by doing an arranged marriage with
Your voice is cracking actually. It's almost gone now. I mean, I can't hear you.
now.
Yeah, now it's better.
Okay, so in the particular interview, Simata Paria tells Dhruv Rathi that after the show aired on Netflix, she got a lot of email queries from youngsters, and a lot of people showed interest in getting married through the arranged marriage way, and they also said that they would like to particularly get married by this thing, what do you call that? By having Seema Taparia fix their be the matchmaker. So,
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't control
any
you.
no, so the thing is, I uh, haven't watched the rest of the season. I've just watched a part of the first episode, and I thought it was good reality TV, not something that I usually watch. But yeah, I watched it as long as I could, and then eventually moved on to something else. But I think it was a interesting thing of, if you want to understand maybe somewhat how things are working out over
Yeah,
there as far as arranged marriage.
let me interrupt you right now. My
Yeah.
sister is a crazy fan of Indian matchmaking. She binge watched all the episodes of that. And even I know the spoilers. I know all the spoilers. I had promised a friend that I'd watch it with her, so I didn't watch it, and now I've not watched it at all. But I know
Okay.
everything about it. And it's just, the thing is, why my sister loves it so much is because it is something she can relate to. It's a
Okay.
thing that, your families kind of pressure you into settling down, and they tell you, like, fine, you can take your time, but at least get your bio data ready, and then you start looking for people and all. It's a very real thing, like the way they've showed it in the show. From what my
Correct.
sister tells,
Yeah.
it's like it might seem like it's an ironic show, but it's not. They're genuinely looking
Yeah.
for partners and all, and it's a real show. And Seema Taparia is a real lady, and
Yeah. Yeah. Correct.
it's
That's a profession. She's a professional matchmaker. There's a particular scene where she removes a binder, and she's got list of names, and everything is categorized from
yeah.
caste to complexion to habits to preferences. And this is not a spoiler, but just to give a context,
No way.
it's
No, I
like a
know it's not a spoiler. It can't be a spoiler. Everyone has watched Indian matchmaking from what I know, and there are memes on Instagram, so everyone knows this. But yeah, even I was going to watch that Decoding with Dhruv. I saw it come up in Netflix YouTube channel. I think it's brilliant. It's so funny, so funny. I'll just tell
Hmm.
you one scene. One of my funniest scenes that I've seen as a
Huh.
spoiler is Seema Taparia is in Aparna's house, and she looks at a painting that she's made of, of a dog, and she's like, "Oh, nice cat" or something. Aparna is like, "It's a dog." Oh man.
So
Oh
yeah.
yeah, you all should watch it. You all should definitely. Dhruv Rathi, I love Dhruv Rathi. He does brilliant work.
Hmm.
It's very funny also and it's very informative. Indian
Correct.
matchmaking with Seema Taparia. I want to look at it. I'm going to watch it as soon as we finish recording this. Oh man.
Okay, I think we should move on to the next beat.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next beat, which is opinion of the week, and moving on to a little more graver topic. This
Okay.
story comes from NDTV, and I
Okay.
realized recently NDTV also has opinions, which I didn't know, but because I came through a Veer Sanghvi opinion. But anyways, moving forward, this piece is written by Vijay Sai Reddy, who is also
Okay.
the General Secretary, the National General Secretary of YSRCP.
Okay.
And he has written this. Here's the headline: We must stop being witness to manual scavenging. Though India has made
Okay.
significant progress in human development, there exists a community which makes its living by carrying human excreta and is forced to service the community's sanitation needs because of an identity based on their caste. Manual scavenging is an act of manually cleaning and disposing of human and animal excreta from dry latrines, sewers, and streets. Manual scavengers and by large belong to the most disadvantaged of the Dalit subcastes. They face discrimination even within the Dalit community. It's been an age-old daily routine for this community. Manual scavenging is not just caste-based but also gender-based, and of 1.2 million manual scavengers, about 95% of them are women. Households with dry latrines prefer women over men to clean their excreta, and most women
Hmm.
are paid only as less as 20 rupees a month, along
What?
with a meal every day for cleaning a dry toilet. Uh,
So the
so
job is to get the meal, not actually earn money.
yeah, because oh my God, I just this is it's a horrible thing, and I'll tell you the reason why I picked this because recently I had seen there are a lot of bungalows in the place where I'm living. There are a lot of bungalows beside here,
Okay.
and they were having their sewer or something in their house. You know, they have this one particular thing where the person goes inside that thing and removes, or he's
Hmm.
cleaning it up. I don't know what exactly it is, but it was just looking at him. He goes down, he goes into that particular thing by opening
Okay.
the, what do you call that, the drain, the cover of the drain.
Manhole.
Yeah, so
Manhole
he,
cover.
yes, so he opens that manhole cover, he goes down, and once he's come up after taking that dubki, he's
Hmm.
covered in muck. He's covered
Hmm.
in
Hmm. Hmm.
muck. It's
Hmm.
sewages that they are cleaning manually. I mean, it's about time that we put in technology for these things, you know? If we want to, get out of this kind of we need to start investing in these things where we can clean the sewages properly.
Hmm.
Because Mumbai, anyways, every monsoon has the problem of flooding. Now, why would Mumbai have to flood?
Correct.
Because the drains are always somehow clogged. Get the proper material, put dustbins in places. I think it's a very, I just don't know. I mean, I'm sorry, I think I've lost my composure in this particular opinion piece, but you understand what
No,
I'm
no.
saying.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those stories which obviously provokes you in many ways, and I think it's one of those stories where there is no other side to it. There's only one side, which is this
Yeah,
has to stop, and
yeah.
there's no other side to it. There is no justification in this world can satisfy you to say, okay, this is allowed, this can be allowed. No, this has to stop.
And there's this one paragraph I'm going to read from his opinion. It's a little further down. It says manual
Hmm.
scavenging is a form of forced labor because people entered into this practice without their choice and cannot leave
Correct.
easily if they even if they wish to do so. The main reason for the continuance of this practice and the manual scavengers depend upon their employers for a lot of resource.
Yeah, I agree.
So uh, it's just, I think, yeah, like you said, there is no other side to this. It is wrong. We need to invest in proper these machines and all to clean out these sewages. I mean, the foreign countries already have that. The amount of NPAs and all that we are already suffering. I think it's about time that the government starts investing into this, at least in the main cities, so that you can prove that the cities are something, right? You're holding the cities to a level. Like you want
Correct. I
everyone to
think
get it. Yeah.
there's a very nice scene in Article 15, the movie by Anubhav Sinha,
Hmm.
which stars Ayushmann Khurrana. And there's a particular scene where the sewage pipeline is blocked and it's overflowing on the ground in front of a police station.
Hmm.
And the backward class in the village is on a strike. They are not working, so the sewage just keeps flowing and overflowing on the on the ground, and it stinks up the whole place. And Anyways, not to give I hope
Yeah, no, no. I
everyone.
remember the scene that you're talking about, and exactly that is what I felt when I saw it a couple of days back. When I
Hmm.
saw that guy cleaning the sewage or whatever that was. I mean, obviously it was sewage
Hmm.
only. I just don't know the proper terms
So
to
the
use. So forgive me.
so the
Yeah.
way that
So, hmm,
anyway, so the way that guy went in and the way he came out, I was that's the first time I've seen manual this thing
scavenging.
cleaning scavenging. That's so scavenging is, I think, a different thing altogether, where they also have to clean up the, like, remove the dead animals from the villages and all. But
Right, right, right.
thing particular scene, that is of, I think, first time I saw, and I was very surprised at the way it was done. And he goes down into it without
Yep.
breathing, eyes are closed. I
Yeah.
mean, in that particular water, it was uh, it was a scene that provokes you or makes you angry of sorts. That
I just want to
that
give one particular statement. Like, look at that. This particular thing exists in our country. Okay, like
mm,
women are who are just getting paid 20 rupees per month, which is unheard of. Like, it doesn't even make sense.
I
And
agree.
just a meal every day for cleaning the dry toilet. And at the same time, what is being reported is like it's like I'm at this point going through this news where, do you know that point in history where the French Revolution happened? There was this
Yeah.
one statement that the queen or the princess of France had said, like, oh, they don't have bread, let them eat cake.
I think that's a misrepresentation of the
Right,
queen.
right.
She was Louis,
I mean, I know it
the
might not
queen
be
of.
accurate, it might not be historically accurate, but it
But
kind of,
that kind of became the propaganda to provoke people to act.
well, I think it's kind of that moment for me in the head has come. It's like, let them eat cake. I'm like, okay, that this is crazy. Anyway, sorry. On that note, I feel, shall we move on to the next and final beat of the day?
Yes.
Yes. So the next beat is interview of the week, which is going to be taken up by you, Sailesh, whenever you are ready.
Yeah, I think this time we have a very interesting interview for you. So the title is "My Job Was That of a Hitman." Former Republic TV editor speaks about his time at the channel. So the particular person we are talking about is Tajinder Singh Sodhi,
Hmm.
who used to work at the Republic TV at least a while back. Just a few days back, he resigned from the TV channel, and he wrote a very long resignation letter. And he's not he's written a very small resignation letter, but then back later on sent another email which lists a lot gives a very long explanation for him to resign. And this was particularly featured on News Laundry. The interview was conducted by Manisha Pandey from News Laundry, and he speaks about why he repeats what he said in the letter of the reason for him to leave the channel and why he in the first place took up the job, and the reasons, uh, or rather the he describes what he had to do while he was working for the channel.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it also gives personal anecdotes of his interactions with the channel's owner and managing director, if I'm not wrong,
Yeah.
Arnab Goswami.
Hmm.
So, and the role his wife plays in the whole company, and
Arnab
how it is,
Goswami's wife.
or yeah, Arnab Goswami's wife plays in the company, and how she, or rather, how the organization functions, and the
Yeah.
kind
And
of,
she's calling all the shots.
no, I think we shouldn't say that to
Right, sorry. Yeah, I mean, that's what he didn't say that she's calling all the
no,
shots,
no,
but
no,
he
I
basically,
think he did say that. I'm just not mentioning it because I want the
oh,
viewers, rather the
sorry,
listeners, to
sorry.
go and
Yes. Okay,
listen to it,
like,
because
so,
the
if I may, I'll give my two
yeah,
cents on this, like I said in the starting.
yes,
So, like, Tejinder Singh Sodhi is basically from Republic TV, which earlier was named 100% Sale of Journalism Ethics Year. That is, they actually, they should be called 100% Sale of Journalism Ethics Year. What do you say, Silent?
I agree. We should just switch names with them.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very. it's it's a horror story what he describes, the time he spent there. And I would say every person who has a little, even the minutest interest in understanding how news is, how a news organization functions or has an interest in following news, should go and watch his interview.
Yeah,
It's a must watch.
because he tells you how a newsroom shouldn't function, like the way it was functioning. But it's a
Exactly.
great insight. I mean, I was also, I remember when you told me you're going to pick this story, we had a conversation, and there was a part of, I think, two interviews. I thought you would take the other one as well, which actually we can mention right now, which is
Yeah.
Dr. Kafil Khan. It was an interview taken in the print, which is also interesting. And you'll find, you know what, if you see Tejinder Singh Sodhi's interview and then you see Dr. Kafil Khan, you'll understand some similarities in the two. Like you'll be able to connect some points there. But yeah, I mean, it's obvious we know about Republic TV, but if you want to know more in detail and get the spice and all, you do check out this interview. I really enjoyed it.
True.
So, what says Sailesh on that note? Should we end the podcast?
Yeah, I think let's do that. I mean, no point dragging it too long.
That is true. So, that's all for today's episode of 100% Sale of Journalism Ethics. Here, if you're listening for the first time, the name is a clickbait. This is actually now going to be a 100% Sale of Journalism Ethics here. Unless we start,
Unless people
unless we
offer us.
no, no, that still we will not sell our soul like that. But until we stop researching the stuff and we just start making up stories, then that's 100% sale of journalism ethics. But till then, I think you can have some faith in us, or at least kind of enjoy a boring conversations, which is a oxymoron, I guess. I don't know. I think Sailesh, I should just shut up and we should end this. What do you say?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, chalo, Sailesh. Bye.
Sure. Bye.